going to go back over now a little bit right in here of the prophets that we have been studying in this realm. Here we have 606. What date is that? Why is that a significant date? All right, Babylon came down and captured Jerusalem. And that was the first captivity. By the way, how many captivities were there? Three captivities. Okay, so the first one was in 606. So there we have the first captivity. Now then, they're going to be in there for 70 years. How do we know 70 years? The prophets prophesied, and Jeremiah told 70 years. That is when they're going to be there. So that brings you down to 536. Now, 536 is when they were first released from captivity. That is when Cyrus came along, and Cyrus said, I'll let you go. You go back to Jerusalem. So they were in there for exactly 70 years then. So those dates are important for us to remember. Now then, we also have a couple more dates. That is 586. And that is the last captivity. By the way, what was the second captivity? Anybody know? It's not really an important one. But what was the second captivity? It was 606 and then 597. That's right, 597 and then 586. Now, in 586, Nebuchadnezzar came back and just wiped them clean, wiped them out and said, okay, that is it. Because they kept rebelling against him, and so he just wiped them out at 586, knocked the temple down, so the temple ceased to exist then in 586. Now, as you take a look at these numbers, this was the final destruction of the temple. Now then, 70 years from the time that it was destroyed, it was finally completed. They started to rebuild it again in 536, but it took them then that many years then to go ahead and rebuild the temple, and it was rebuilt in 516. Now, 516 really is not an important number to remember. There again, the important numbers really to remember in this is 606, which was the first captivity, 586, which was when the temple was destroyed, and then you don't have to remember anymore, because all you got to do is subtract then. If you ever want to know, well, okay, when did they start the temple then? Well, just subtract the 70 years, and you come on back down then to your 516, and you get it in there. So 606 and 586 are the important years for us to remember in all of this. Now, Daniel went into captivity in the first captivity. First time that they went, they took Daniel with them, and Daniel became a what is called a magician. Nebuchadnezzar had magicians in his court, and so he became a magician. Now, when you think about a magician, you're thinking about what you think of today, only there's a little difference. Today, if there's going to be a magician come on TV, he gets up and he does all of these tricks. But what will they always tell you today? What will a magician always tell you? Now, the things you're getting ready to see are an illusion. See? It's an illusion. I have skills to where I'm going to be able to do things, manipulate them around, so that you're going to see things you don't think you're seeing. See? Or there are going to be things that you miss in this whole thing. It's an illusion. Now, the magicians back there, they did these tricks, only they didn't say it's an illusion. They knew it was. They had the tricks. You see, if they were going to pull a rabbit out of the hat, they had to poke him in there first, but they didn't tell anybody. And they acted as though they were actually creating a rabbit. And so these are men then that had the reputation of having divine powers. These guys, they have a connection with the divine. So now you have Nebuchadnezzar, and he's king, and he wants to rule the world. Would it be wise for any king to try to get the best advice he could get to rule the world? Obviously. See, any president or any king is going to get the best advice that they can get. Well, at that time, from his viewpoint, being an idolater, who would be the best advisors you could get? Who's the closest to the divine? The magicians. Right? And so he then had magicians around him. And so he made Daniel one of these magicians. Now, the interesting thing about it is that Daniel was able to interpret dreams. He was able to actually do these things, and it was very clear to the king that Daniel could actually do it, but the other guys could not really do it. The thing that really broke it down is Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. And so he called his magicians in. He said, I had a dream last night, and I'm all mixed up about this. I'm confused. Tell me what my dream meant. What did the magician say? Okay, we'll be happy to. Then what did they ask him? What was the dream? And Nebuchadnezzar said, well, if you can interpret dreams and you know all of these things, you could tell me what the dream is. So tell me what the dream is. Oh, no man has ever been able to tell you what the dream is, but if you'll tell us what it is, we'll be able to interpret it. And so then he put an order out, if you don't do it, I'm going to kill all of you. He knows now that there are a bunch of fakes, and so the word gets back, all the magicians are going to be killed, and so Daniel then steps forward and says, well, I can interpret the dream. See? So he goes up and he says, King, here's what you dreamed. And he described his dream in detail. Then he tells him what it means. Nebuchadnezzar knows then that Daniel is the real McCoy. So he's the one that actually is has a connection here with divine powers. So he made him then the head. So Daniel always worked with Nebuchadnezzar. He was the prophet in Nebuchadnezzar's house then during that 70-year period of time. Now in 586, when they came down, they got Ezekiel, and they brought him in, and Ezekiel then was a prophet, but Ezekiel didn't prophesy to King Nebuchadnezzar. Who did he prophesy to? Just the Jews in the area, the regular Jews that was out there. He prophesied to them. And what he told them was, we are here in this captivity. You and I are here for what reason? Disobeying God. And we have to turn back to God in order for us to be saved. So that was his message that he had there. Okay, as we look at this then, we say, okay, you start out 606, you come down 70 years, that's 536. Now, they're back in Jerusalem then again, and they're out of captivity. So now for the next 100 years, you have a period in there that's called post-captivity. That is the period of time after the captivity. That takes you down to about 420. Then you have a period between the testaments from about 420, or let's just call it 400 for round figures, from 400 to 0, which is, can anybody subtract that? 0 from 400? Even Vernon can take care of that. So there's about a 400-year period between the testaments. And there were no prophets that were in there at that time. Then after that, after you get down to 0, that is the period then of where, go on down to 70, the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, in these periods, you have this. You have Daniel and Ezekiel in this period of time. Then you have Esther and Ezra and Nehemiah and Haggai and Zechariah and Malachi in this 100-year period of time. They would be called the post-captivity prophets. And then over here in this 400-year period of time, it's a very interesting thing that happens there. You don't find any books in the Bible about it. You don't find any prophets in the Bible about it. The last one you're going to find is Malachi, the book that they're talking about right now. But an interesting thing is that you find back there when Daniel prophesied, he told about some certain things, and they came to pass down here in this period of time. Okay? And God raised up people to see that they came to pass there. So now then you have the Hasmoneans and the Romans and the Herods. And they rise up and they make their way up at this period of time. Now, when you get over here, then you have Christ and the church. Now, when you have Christ and the church over here at this period, do you have anything about the Romans, anything about Herod that's involved in there? Yeah. So we studied the period between the Testaments, which we'll start next in 2 weeks. Then we'll see how these guys had their beginning, how they rose up, and how that all fit in that's in there. But for right now, we have this. Remember, Daniel saw this vision up there, and here he had all of these various countries there. What country followed Babylon? Who conquered Babylon? The Medes and the Persians. Then who conquered the Medes and the Persians? The Grecians. What was that guy's name who was the head of the Grecian army, the Greek? Alexander the Great. He came and he conquered them then at that period of time. Then you go on down and you have the Romans then, starting in 24 B.C., and that's the period of when the kingdom was established. But there you have a 400-year period between the Grecian and the Roman Empire that you have down here. This is the period of time that we're in now. Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. That's where these guys are. Now, as we talk about Malachi, let's kind of put him in perspective in here. We've had Ezra came in, and what was his job? Now, he's not known as a prophet, but what was his job? That was Zerubbabel. Now, in the book of Ezra, we have the first section was about a guy that laid the foundation of the temple, that built the temple, and that was Zerubbabel. Then Ezra came in. What did he do? He restored the law. That's right. Then, how did Haggai fit into this thing? When Zerubbabel was trying to rebuild the temple, do you remember that the enemies came and they stopped him and said, we're going to go back and we're going to tell on you, and so they stopped him for a period of time. And then the people got lax and they quit working on the temple, and so God sent Haggai and Zechariah to help Ezra there to rebuild, Ezra and Zerubbabel to rebuild that temple. See? Get busy and rebuild that temple. And so they prophesied then at that period of time. Then, after the temple was rebuilt, after Ezra restored the law, who came along? Who was the last guy then? Nehemiah. Nehemiah came, and what did he do? Did I hear it? The walls, that's right. He rebuilt the walls around it then, that is in there. All right, he rebuilds the walls. Now then, we have the physical thing restored then again. Now, all of this happened there in about 450 B.C., somewhere in there. 500 to 450 B.C., in about a 50-year period that you have. All of this happened that we're talking about. Now, after Nehemiah rebuilt the walls, about 50 years later, it could even be 20 years later, because we don't know exactly on these dates that we've got right now, but let's say 50 years later, Malachi comes on the scene. Now let me ask you this question. As we start out, I don't care how far we go back, it doesn't make any difference where we go back. If you go back, let's say to the law of Moses. Let's go back to the law of Moses. Why did God give the law of Moses? This is kind of a trick question, and yet it's not a trick question. Why did he give the law of Moses? Galatians 3 tells us. Because of sin. The people were sinning, so God called Moses, and he took him up on Mount Sinai, gave him a law to try to hold the people under control. Now, when God took him up on that mountain shook and belched forth smoke and fire, and a great voice came out, and those people heard it, and they shuddered, and they trembled. When Moses brought the law down, they grabbed that law and obeyed it all their life, didn't they? Isn't that what you'd do? That's what you'd think you'd do, but no, they didn't do it. They disobeyed it. And when Moses died, Moses said in his last sermon, "You have been a rebellious people since the day I knew you." So even in Moses' day, that's where they were. Now then you come along and Joshua takes over. He brings them into the land of Canaan. They had one simple job to do. What was the job? God said, you go do it. I'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. What was the job? Eradicate the Canaanites. They go in. Bang! knock Jericho down. But they knocked Jericho down in a kind of a funny way, wasn't it? In other words, God told them, said, here's what I want you to do. You remember, march around it, then 7 times, then the walls fall. You suppose God's laying a foundation to show them, I'm with you. I'll take care of these people. Okay, so they knock that down. Then they go up. They take the city of Ai. They go up then, and they take some others. Then, when they pop over the hill, they find some Canaanite cities that are built with great walls around them. They're built on these mounds that we talk about, these tales and great walls around them. What did they do with all those cities? Didn't conquer one of them. They left them there. So they didn't obey God. Now they married into that group of people. Then they started disobeying God again. So as we studied, how much of the Old Testament that we've studied now in all this period of time deals with the Jews disobeying God and God cursing them, bringing the curse upon them, causing famines or droughts or earthquakes or wild animals or wars. And so he curses them, and they turn back and cry to God, "O Lord, save us," and God saves them. And then immediately, what do they do again in another 20 years or so? Right back into disobedience. And then God does this again to bring them back, and then they cry out to God, he saves them, and then what do they do in another 20 years? See? Back down again. Now, God tries to get them to give up their idols, but they will not give it up. So finally, God then tells them, you will give up idols. What did God do to take their idols away from them? Took them into Babylonian captivity. And at that time he said, now I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you what life is with idols without me. And he said, I'm just going to do one simple thing. I'm not going to do any bad stuff. I'm just going to do one simple thing. I'm just going to leave the temple. And God left the temple. There it is. It's yours. You do as you please. I'm not taking anything with me. There's the temple. There's your idols. There's the country. Wherever you want. But I'm leaving. And what happened after he left? Immediately, Nebuchadnezzar comes down. He conquers them. He taxes them. They goes back home. They quit paying their tax. He comes back and conquers them, taxes them. They quit paying their tax. He comes back down and wipes them out. And in 70 years of captivity, with Ezekiel telling them the problem, they got the point, we're in here because of idolatry. So they got rid of idolatry. So now, they come back out. And when they come back out, they rebuilt the temple. They rebuilt the law. They rebuilt the walls. They did all of these things. Now, what kind of people do you suppose they'll be? Right back down where they are. So 50 years after all of this that we're studying, right back down in the same condition. And so God sends his last prophet. His last prophet is Malachi. What do you suppose Malachi is going to be about? We can just close up our book and go home tonight. There's no use even reading it. It's going to be condemning them for the condition that they are in. So that's kind of gives us an idea now of how all of this fits in. If we take that Bible timeline, there we have Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai, and Zechariah up there with that second temple getting it started. Here we have the last prophet, 400 B.C. There's a 400-year period of time in between them. This is the period that we'll get into, the Maccabees and the Herods and the development of the Roman Empire. But back there is Malachi, 400 years there. So he now is the last prophet. And that's what we're going to be talking about now tonight. So let's get acquainted with Malachi for just a moment right here. And the subject of Malachi is indifference. This is what he's going to condemn them for. The people at this time are just laid back, taking life easy, doing what they want to do, not making any great sacrifices, just practicing their religion in an indifferent way with really no reverence to God. Worship was boring and weary, And he tells them that. The people were saying, oh, it is so weary. We have to go offer sacrifices up there every day. And it just gets so weary and so tired. The sacrifices turned into just a ritual. And this is where he's going to condemn them. Your sacrifices are more than rituals. You come and you bring your lamb and you kill it and you put it on the altar and you burn it. And you do what I tell you to do. And while you're doing it, oh, it is just so tiresome to do this. It's just such a weary thing to serve God every day. And you don't even have a day off in serving God. And it just gets so tiresome. But we'll do it. We'll do it. And their hearts weren't in it. And so when they went out to get their animals, they went out and the animal doesn't make too much difference. So just get that one over there. It's about to die. He'll die next week anyway. And so they go over and they get their sick and their lame and they bring them. What had God commanded? Perfection, without spot, without blemish. But just get them and bring it over. So their sacrifice was just a ritual that they just went through. Could we fall into these things today? Just get weary and just start doing things just for a ritual. The priest quit enforcing God's law. They had the job of teaching the law and making sure the people obeyed the law. But they quit doing that. Just such a terrible thing. And they were divorcing their Jewish wives and marrying the heathen women. How many times has this happened? Over and over and over again, hasn't it? And so he's going to deal with this, and he's going to condemn them in doing this. Now, the way he's going to do it is with what's called a didactic dialectic. Isn't that some word? Now, this is a new method of teaching, and all it is teaching by having a conversation. So it's kind of like this. I go home tonight and I tell Helen, I say, honey, you haven't been showing me any respect lately. Now, what will she say? You know what she's going to say, right? All you guys know what she's going to say. Wherein have I not been? What do you mean? And then, well, the other day I said this, and you just laughed at it and walked away. Now, if I were teaching, this would be the way I could teach this, see? I could say, okay, now then let me say. I say, my wife hasn't been showing me any respect. But she says, when was it I wasn't showing you any respect? Well, I'll tell you when she didn't show me respect. The other day. And so, do you see, I asked the teacher, I'm going to carry on the conversation, back and forth, and just as though she interrupts me and asks her questions, so I will carry on the conversation, I'll make a point, then I know what she's going to say, so I'll just ask the question, and then I'll answer the question. And so that became, with Malachi, a way of teaching. And it became the way that the Jews used later then in their synagogues. As they would teach in their synagogues and homes and so forth, why this became a very favorite way of teaching then. So we'll see this in a minute. Now, what happens is the speaker states a fact. Helen hadn't been treating me nice. The hearer objects with a question, only she doesn't object. I, as the speaker, will do it. See, so I'll say, but she says, and then in here, well, 10 times, he's going to use this right here. 10 times, the people interrupt with the words here, you say. In other words, Malachi will say, here's what you do, but you say. When do we do that? Well, here's when you do that. And so we're going to get that 10 times right here in this, especially in the first chapter that we've got here. Then the speaker answers a question. So that's what that means up there, so we can forget the dialectic, or the didactic dialectic. Didactic is the Greek word for teaching, and dialectic is a word that means language. And so it is a method of teaching just by carrying on a conversation is what it is. Now, he's going to make a point. And in here, he's going to attribute what he has to say to God. How many chapters are there in this book? Anybody count that high? 4 chapters in this book. And yet, 25 times, Malachi is going to say, "Thus saith Jehovah," in some way or another there. In other words, I'm speaking, God says. And so he's going to apply his message. This is what God says. So he's coming now to speak to an indifferent group of people, try to wake them up, call them back to being zealous for God one more time. So let's start out now with the book of Malachi. It starts out and it says, "The burden of the word of Jehovah to Israel." Now, the burden of the word of Jehovah. Burden means a heavy load. Now, there's a heavy load that the word of Jehovah is going to throw on you. Now, a heavy load is really going to be this, that when you're just sitting back, "Oh, I'm so tired, I'm not going to serve God, I'm not going to do this," then when God tells you what you have to do, how are you going to feel? You're going to feel, "Boy, this is a heavy load, aren't you?" You see? So he said, now, here we're going to deal with this burden of this here by Malachi. Jehovah says, "I have loved you, saith Jehovah. Yet ye say," here was their attitude at this time, "Wherein have thou loved us?" Not this time. They were raising that question. A lot of people raise. Especially when somebody dies in a family, a spouse or a child. People today will question God. Why did God do that? God doesn't love me. If God loved me, he wouldn't let such a thing as this happen. And so we start attributing these things to God. Now, these people here had come to the point, God doesn't love us. It's just evidently God doesn't love us. Don't have any more prophets. We're just sitting here and things kind of going bad and having a lot of droughts and a lot of crop failures and so forth. But, of course, why would those things happen anyway? Because God loved them, see, and he would be punishing them. But they were saying in there, now, God says, "I've loved you," but you say, "Wherein?" He said, "Was not Esau Jacob's brother, saith Jehovah? Yet I loved Jacob, but Esau I hated, and made his mountain a desolation, and gave his heritage to the jackals in the wilderness." So I said, let's just go back to the very beginning. Back there with Jacob and Esau. Who was it that I chose? Jacob. And I said, then Esau is going to serve Jacob. Now then here he says, "Esau I hated." Now, what he's talking about here is the nations that came from these boys. What nation came from Jacob? The Jews, Israelites. I've loved you. And what nation came from Esau? Edom. And so Edom, I've hated. Edom has turned and they've disobeyed God, and so I've hated that nation, and I've punished that nation. He said, "Whereas Edom saith, we are beaten down." Now Edom cries in here, "We're beaten down, but we will return and build the waste places, thus saith Jehovah of hosts." So when I beat Edom down, what does Edom say they'll do? Instead of saying, there must be a higher power, there must be something we need to examine in our life, what do they say? "We'll rebuild." So they'd rebuild and said, "They shall build, but I will throw down, and men shall call them the border of wickedness." So let them build again. That's what they've done. Every time a country conquers them, they come back out, they rebuild, but they only rebuild to get conquered again. Then they rebuild, then they get conquered again. That's what happened to Edom. He said, they're just a border or a country of wickedness. "The people against whom Jehovah hath indignation forever. And your eyes shall see, and ye shall, and yet ye say, Jehovah be magnified beyond the borders of Israel." So you look out and you see this, and you are so bad you're saying, well, the Lord loves Edom as much as he loves us. The Lord will be magnified out there. Now then, he goes in with this method of teaching. He said, "A son honoreth his father, and a servant his master." Now this is taught by God, isn't it? The son should honor the father. In fact, if a son doesn't honor the father under the law of Moses and keeps disobeying the father, what does the father has to do to him? That's right, he's stoned to death. So a son is to honor a father, and of course the servant the master. He said, if then I am a father, where is my honor? And if I am a master, where is my fear? Saith Jehovah of hosts unto you. So you call me a father, you call me a master, but if I am, where is my fear? O priest that despise my name. Now the minute that he said, the priests that despise my name, he knows what they're going to say. What are they going to say? Well, how do we despise your name? So then he brings it up here, and here. He said, you offer polluted bread upon mine altar. And you say, wherein have we polluted thee? You see, every time he says something, you'll argue with this thing. See, wherein have we polluted thee? Well, in that you say the table of Jehovah is contemptible. So now, what he's saying in here is, verse 7, you offer polluted bread upon my altar. Now the altar was the altar of where they kill the animal. It's the lamb. And that's the bread that he's talking about. That's the food. That's what they offered out there on the altar. So you offer, your sacrifice is polluted. You offer sick animals out there. It's polluted on the altar. And you say, well, wherein have we polluted you? In here. And in that you say, well, the table of the Lord is contemptible. In other words, the table or the altar of the Lord is it's just a, you turn up your nose at it. It's we have to do it too much anyway, don't we? Why does it have to be done so much? Couldn't it be done some other way? And so, showing it in a contemptible way, instead of showing it in a reverential way in there. Now he said, and when you offer the blind for sacrifice, it is no evil. And when you offer the lame and the sick, it is no evil. See, that's what that's what you're offering us. These are offering me, these sheep and so forth, that are blind and lame and sick. And you say that's not evil? That's not showing contempt? That's not showing that you despise me? He said, present it now unto thy governor. Will he be pleased with thee, or will he accept thy person? Now, when the government says, I want you to pay your taxes, and you say, okay, we'll be glad to pay our taxes. So you get out and you get your blind sheep, you get your lame and your sick, and you give it to the governor. And so that's what we give the governor for our taxes. Will the governor accept that? Absolutely not. What kind of check does the governor expect you to send in this next week? You might say, well, I don't have any money. I didn't ask you that. What kind of check does the governor expect you to send in next week? See? You better have the money in it. It better be a good one. You better not send in a check with half of what is there. The governor says, this is what I want, and that's what the governor is going to get, and he's not going to take the blind and the lame and the sick. And now, if the governor won't take it, and you give it to me, God, he's trying to get them to see the condition they're in. 9. And now I pray you, entreat the favor of God, that he may be gracious unto us. This hath been by your means. Now, the reason we're in such a terrible condition is our fault. It's what we've done. It's not what God has done. Will he accept any of your persons, saith Jehovah of hosts? So is God going to accept any of us as we offer him all the sick and the lame and the blind? And then when we offer the sick and the lame and the blind, what's our attitude when we offer it? Oh, turn up our nose. It is such a weary thing that we have to do. Then he says in verse 10, oh, that there were one among you that would shut the doors, that you might not kindle fire on mine altar in vain. Now, if you picture the temple, out in front of the temple was the altar. This is where they offered their sacrifices. Now, there was a yard around this, and there was a fence around it. And this is the gate that he says, I wish somebody would shut it. I wish somebody would just lock the gate so that you couldn't get in and offer these sacrifices. It would be better not to offer me any sacrifices than to offer these polluted sacrifices with the attitude that you've got. In businesses today, they put signs up there and says, if your check bounces in there, it's a $20, extra $20. Why do they put that up there? You gave them a check. Suppose that you ask some business. You say, look, I want to write you a check, but I guarantee you it will bounce. But I'll write you a check. But I don't have that money in there, and it will bounce. What will that person tell you? Well, don't write me a check. Because if you write me a check, it's going to cost me more. So I just wish you'd quit writing checks. See? That's what God says. I just wish somebody would shut the door so that you won't bring in the old, sick, lame animals that are in here. Because I don't accept that kind of worship there. So he says in here, oh, that there were one among you that would shut the doors, that you might not kindle fire on mine altar in vain. So when they burned those animals on that altar, they did it in vain. What does that mean? Word vain? Zero. Useless. Worthless. Nothing. Nothing out of it. Be the best just to close the doors. I have no pleasure in you, saith Jehovah of hosts, neither will I accept an offering at your hand. So I want you to see what condition you're in. I have no pleasure in you. I will not accept your offerings. Now, what condition are the Jews in at this time? Within 50 years of the time Nehemiah finally rebuilt those walls, they now were firmly entrenched to serve God, had taken that covenant, we will be faithful to you all of our life. He said, from the rising of the sun even to the going down, that's the east to the west, of the same my name shall be great among the Gentiles. And in every place incense shall be offered unto my name, and a pure offering. For my name shall be great among the Gentiles, saith Jehovah of hosts. Now, here's where he's looking ahead. Is God saying at this point, the Gentiles will now come into the temple and offer sacrifices? No. Was it lawful for a Gentile to go in and offer a sacrifice? No. Gentile couldn't go in there. What God's looking for is on down later in the spiritual kingdom. The time's going to come, even though you Jews, the nation that I've chosen, the nation that I've nourished, the nation that I've protected, even though you've done this, you are so bad, I want you to know that the Gentiles are going to come, and they're going to offer pure sacrifices. Now, today, do we offer sacrifices in the church? The Christians offer sacrifices. Yeah. In 1 Peter 2, we're told there that we are a spiritual priesthood that's built up to offer spiritual sacrifices. In Hebrews, the 13th chapter, we're told that our sacrifices are the fruit of our lips, how we serve our God. So when we offer sacrifices, when we sing, and when we pray, and when we teach, when we talk, when we speak at home, are our words of such a nature that it honors God? Do they come out pure? Do they come out holy? Do they come out in harmony with what God teaches? Have we put God's word in our mind so that the words that comes out are words in harmony with God's words? He said, now, that's what the Gentiles are going to do. Is it easy for us today to fall in the same thing, being weary and so forth in doing this? 12. But ye profane it, in that you say the table of Jehovah is polluted, and the fruit thereof, even his food, is contemptible. But ye say also, behold, what a weariness it is. It's just such a It's just such a weary, tiresome thing to serve God, and you have snuffed at it. I guess what we'd say today is you turned up your nose at it, wouldn't it? You just turned up your nose at it, saith Jehovah of hosts, and you have brought that which was taken by violence, and the lame, and the sick. Thus you bring the offering. Should I accept this at your hand, saith Jehovah? So you go out and you rob somebody, violently take these things, and you bring it down, you offer it down here, stuff you've robbed. Or you take your sick animals and you offer it to me. Should I accept it? But cursed be the deceiver who hath in his flock a male and voweth to sacrifice unto the Lord a blemished thing. That's the problem. If you have a good sheep and you offer a blemished thing, you are cursed. For I am a great king, saith Jehovah of hosts, and my name is terrible among the Gentiles. The Gentiles are going to fear my name, reverence my name throughout the world. So he's comparing what will happen with what the Jews are doing right there. He continues on. And now, O you priest, this commandment is for you. If ye will not hear, and if ye will not lay it to heart to give glory unto my name, saith Jehovah of hosts, then will I send the curse upon you, and I will curse your blessings. Yea, I have cursed them already. So I've already cursed them. That's the reason you're in such a bad situation. And if you continue doing this, I'm going to curse them more, because you do not lay it to heart. Now here's the teachers. And the teachers, the priest, they were not laying it to heart. They were not serving God with a zealous heart. Behold, I will rebuke your seed, and will spread dung upon your faces, even the dung of your feast, and ye shall be taken away with it. Now you know that is so ugly that it's almost immoral to talk about in public, isn't it? If a person just gets up and says, I'm going to do that, I want you to think what God says. I want you to see how God feels. Now then, when you bring up these sheep and these animals, they were brought in by the hundreds. Was there a lot of dung, manure? Was there? Yeah. And when they came in and they offered the animal on the altar, they were to take the dung when they opened up its stomach and got it out. They were to take the dung, and they were to take it outside the gate and burn it out there. God says, you bring all of these things in, and you offer these things to me. And he said, I'm going to take the manure and wipe it in your face. Now, do you think God's upset? When God uses that kind of terminology and that kind of an example to show them, this is what's going to happen to you. And you shall know that I have set this commandment unto you, that my covenant may be with Levi, saith Jehovah of hosts. I made a covenant with the Levi and his children, and that you are spatial people, you are the priest, and you are to teach the people to obey the law, and you're to obey it, and you're going to know it before I'm through with you. You're either going to turn and do it, or I'm going to make it so bad on you that you're going to know that I, God, am the one that has brought this curse on you because of what you've done. He said, my covenant was with him of life and peace with Levi. If you people will do this, you will have life and peace. And I gave them to him that he might fear, and he feared me, and stood in awe of my name. Back at the beginning, they stood in awe of the name of God. They did what I told them to do. The law of truth was in his mouth, and unrighteousness was not found in his lips. He walked with me in peace and uprightness, and turned many away from iniquity. That's a job. That's what he did back at the very beginning. Now, here's what a priest is supposed to do. For the priest's lips should keep knowledge, and they should seek the law at his mouth. That is, people would come to the priest and ask him, what does the law say? For he is the messenger of Jehovah of hosts. But ye are turned aside of the way, and ye have ceased, ye have caused many to stumble in the law. You have corrupted the covenant of Levi, saith Jehovah of hosts. So instead of doing what a priest is supposed to do, you have done exactly the opposite. You are not upholding the law of God. You're not teaching the people. Therefore, I have also made you contemptible and base before all the people according as you have not kept my commandments, but have respect to persons in the law. You people teach according to what you're paid for. You have respect for persons. Some high person wants something, yeah, you'll give it to him. You'll cheat the poor, and so forth. That's the other prophets prophesy and tell about. These people were in bad shape. Now, I'm hurrying through to get to the last thing. In verse 10, here's where he's going to start with them marrying, divorcing their Jewish wives and marrying outside. He said, have we, that is Jews, husband and wives, have we not all one Father? Hath not one God created us? Why do we deal treacherously, every man against his brother, profaning the covenant of our fathers? Why do we cheat each other? Now he's going to get into showing what we mean by cheating each other, in brothers cheating brothers. It's in husbands mistreating their wives and divorcing them. He said, Judah hath dealt treacherously, and the abomination is committed in Israel and in Jerusalem. For Judah hath profaned the holiness of Jehovah, which he loveth, and has married the daughters of a foreign god. So here it is, Judah, the people of Judah, these people that are back here. They now have married daughters of a foreign god. Jehovah will cut off to the man that doeth this, him that waketh and him that answereth. That must be some kind of a colloquialism. Him that waketh is a guy that would come in and say, ho, whoa, wake up. And then the guy wakes up. In other words, it's talking about everybody. This is something for everybody. To the very man. When you do this, God's going to cut you off. Here. It said, out of the tents of Jacob, and him that offereth sacrifice unto Jehovah of hosts. And this again you do. You cover the altar of Jehovah with tears, with weeping, and with sighing, insomuch that he regardeth not the offerings anymore, neither receiveth with goodwill at your hand. Now this evidently is talking about the tears of the wives. These guys find a pretty heathen girl, they put away their Jewish wife, leave her without any money, with all the troubles of this, and go marry this other woman. She goes to the altar and she's crying. And he said, you're doing it so much that the tears of these women have just covered the altar. And he said in here, and I've seen it. And he said, the tears covering that altar. And I will not accept your sacrifices because of your ungodly life. Yet you say, wherefore? What do you mean I've been treating? What do you mean I've been treating my fellow man such bad? He said, because Jehovah hath been witness between thee and the wife of thy youth, against whom thou hast dealt treacherously, though she is thy companion and the wife of thy covenant. Here it is. You made a covenant with your Jewish wife. You made an agreement. You made a covenant with her. And now you have broken that covenant with her. And you've dealt with her treacherously. Not righteously, but treacherously. You've dealt with her in an ungodly way. The very wife of your youth. The one that you've lived with all the days of your years. And yet when you get old, she's not good enough for you. You want some good-looking heathen that's out there. Now, verse 15 is an interesting verse. If you read that and understand it, you have a problem. Now, as I say, you have a problem. It is hard to translate. And here it says, and did he not make one, although he had the residue of the Spirit? Wherefore one, so forth. Now, I'm going to put up here another translation of this, the New American Standard and the New American Standard updated. And I think that will give you what it means. You probably have it down here in your footnotes anyway. Now, put it in context here. Here it is. These people now have been treating their wives and so forth so badly. He said, but not one has done so who has a remnant of the Spirit. If you even had just a little bit of the Spirit of God, just a little bit of the teaching of God, you wouldn't treat your wife that way. And what did that one do while he was seeking a godly offspring? Here it is. I'm seeking a godly offspring. So I do away with my Jewish wife and go out and marry a heathen? What do you do to get a godly offspring? You're going to get an ungodly child. Take heed then to your spirit, and let no one deal treacherously against the wife of your youth. So this is a verse that condemns them for how they're dealing with their wife, and what he says is, if you just had a little bit of the Spirit of God that's in you, you wouldn't do this. Then 16, he summarized it, he said, for I hate putting away. That's the word for divorce. I hate divorce, saith Jehovah, the God of Israel, and him that covereth his garment with violence, saith Jehovah of hosts. Therefore take heed to your spirit, that you deal not treacherously. So don't you deal with your wife treacherously. Now quickly, is there a way that a divorce can take place without it being, and still be acceptable to God? Okay, God has told us for the cause of fornication. Now, even in that case, one of the partners have been unfaithful, haven't they? And it is a horrible thing. So anytime a divorce takes place, there's something that God hates. There has to be, it's either an ungodly, treacherous divorce, or it's sin involved. You see that he's got in there. So God says, I hate it. And yet, you just go ahead and you do it. Now, 17. You have wearied Jehovah with your words. That's all I get. You guys that's talking, and you, where we do this, where do we do that, all it is, you just weary me, saith. Yet you say, wherein have we wearied him? In that you say, everything that is evil is good in the sight of Jehovah, and he delighteth in them, or where is the God of justice? So you have a way of saying that good is evil, or evil is good. And by the way, where is God anyway? If I want to do something, can't I do it? Where is God? See? Now, you weary me with those statements. All right, that brings us to the end of the first half of the book of Malachi.